The notification sound was almost silent, a single chime in the vast, sun-drenched quiet of their Manhattan penthouse. For Ava Sterling, 7 months pregnant, and tracing the lazy path of a dust mote in the light that chime was the first crack in the perfect life she had so meticulously built. It wasn't a message from her husband, tech titan Liam Sterling. It was a news alert from the New York Post, and the headline featured his name. The photo below it, grainy and illicit, showed Liam, his lips pressed against another woman's. This is the story of how a single notification can detonate a billion-dollar empire, shatter a marriage, and send a pregnant woman on a journey of reinvention that no one, least of all her powerful husband, could have ever predicted. The Sterling penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a curated masterpiece of minimalist wealth. White marble floors stretched into an infinity of glass walls, offering a god's-eye view of Central Park. The air itself seemed filtered, carrying only the faint, expensive scent of white lilies and lemon oil. Ava Sterling had designed this life, or at least she had perfected its aesthetic. She was the serene, elegant partner to Liam Sterling, the charismatic founder and CEO of Auratech, a company that had revolutionized personal data security. They were New York's golden couple, brilliant, beautiful, and untouchably successful. On that Tuesday morning, Ava felt the first real kick from her unborn son, a flutter that had become a firm nudge against her ribs. She smiled, placing a hand on her stomach. Everything was on schedule. The nursery, a symphony of soft grays and creams, was complete. The pediatricians at Mount Sinai were on standby. Liam was set to close a monumental deal with a Japanese conglomerate, a deal that would elevate Auratech from a tech world darling to a global behemoth. Their life was a testament to meticulous planning and relentless ambition. Then came the chime. Ava glanced at her phone, resting on the polished Calcutta marble of the kitchen island. A push notification from the New York Post. She usually swiped them away, dismissing them as city gossip. But Liam's name in the headline snagged her attention. Auratech titan Liam Sterling's private data exposed, caught in steamy affair with junior exec. The words didn't compute at first. They were a jumble of alien concepts. Steamy affair, junior exec. It had to be a mistake, a hack, a smear campaign by a corporate rival. Liam had enemies. Men who commanded billions always did. Her thumb, trembling slightly, tapped the link. The screen filled with a grainy, long-lens photograph. It was unmistakably Liam. His custom-tailored Tom Ford suit was rumpled, his usually perfect dark hair disheveled. He was leaning against the rain-slicked brick wall of a Soho alleyway, his face a mask of reckless passion. And pressed against him was a woman. Ava didn't recognize her at first, but then the accompanying article named her Chloe Vance, a 26-year-old vice president of strategy at Auratech. A woman Ava had met at the company Christmas party, a woman she had complimented on her ambition. In the photo, Chloe's hands were tangled in Liam's hair. Her eyes closed. The intimacy was brutal, a physical violation broadcast for the world to see. Ava's breath hitched. The air in the penthouse suddenly felt thick, suffocating. She scrolled down, her heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. There were more photos. Liam and Chloe sharing a clandestine dinner at Balthazar, their heads bent close together. Chloe leaving Liam's downtown crash pad, an apartment he'd claimed was for late nights at the office in the early morning hours. There were screenshots of leaked emails, flirtatious and damning. The article was a character assassination, not just of Liam, but of their entire life. It painted him as a hypocrite, the man who sold the world digital security while his own secrets were splashed across the internet. It painted Ava by omission as the clueless, tragic wife. A footnote in her own husband's spectacular implosion. Her phone began to buzz uncontrollably, a cascade of texts and calls. Her mother, her sister, her best friend, Sarah. News alerts from TMZ, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. The scandal wasn't just gossip. It was a financial event. Auratech's stock would be in free fall by the opening bell. She sank onto one of the stark white bar stools, her hand still protectively on her stomach, as if she could shield her son from the poison seeping through the screen. A wave of nausea sharper and more acidic than any morning sickness she had experienced rose in her throat. The lilies on the counter suddenly smelled cloying funereal. The perfect, sterile world she had curated now felt like a mausoleum. She heard the key in the private elevator door. The soft whir announced his arrival. Liam strode in, his face pale, his eyes wide with a panic she had never seen before. He was holding his own phone, the screen lit up with the same horrifying images. "Ava," he began, his voice hoarse. "Ava, listen to me. It's not what it looks like." It was the oldest, most pathetic cliché in the book, and hearing it from the mouth of the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, the father of her child, was like a physical blow. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see the brilliant visionary or the charming husband. She saw a stranger, a weak, careless man who had risked everything, their marriage, their child's future, his own empire, for a tawdry fling in a Soho alley. "Don't," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 shattered promises. She stood up, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't cry. The shock was too deep, a frozen mass in her chest. "Don't you dare lie to me, Liam. Not now." He flinched as if she had slapped him. Okay, I messed up. I messed up Ava horribly. It was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake." Meaningless. Her voice was dangerously quiet. "You call this meaningless?" She gestured around the vast, empty room at the life that now felt like a stage set. "She works for you. You promoted her. You bought her gifts. The article mentions a Cartier bracelet. Was that meaningless too?" "It meant nothings," he insisted, taking a step toward her. "You and the baby. You're my life. We can fix this. I'll fire her. I'll issue a public apology. My PR team is already drafting a statement. We'll get through this." "We." The word was a mockery. There was no "we" anymore. He had taken a sledgehammer to it. He wasn't talking about fixing their marriage. He was talking about damage control for his brand. She was just another asset to be managed in the fallout. The realization was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. She turned and walked away from him toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. The city bustled below, oblivious. Her world had stopped spinning, but the rest of the world kept right on going. The digital guillotine had fallen, and in the deafening silence that followed, Ava Sterling knew her life as she knew it was over. The only question was what she would build in its place. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated composure. While Liam and his team of high-priced crisis managers from Kroll Inc. were locked in their war room, Ava moved through her gilded cage with a chilling, methodical purpose. She didn't scream or throw things. She didn't dissolve into tears. The pain was too profound for that. It had solidified into something hard and dense, a core of pure, cold resolve. Her grief was a private, silent thing, a severance of the soul that required no audience. She instructed her assistant to cancel everything, her prenatal yoga class, the final nursery consultation with the designer from RH Baby and Child, her weekly lunch with her mother. She then made one phone call to a number she had stored years ago, and hoped she would never need Arthur Finch, a senior partner at Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen and Katz, known less for his corporate litigation and more for his discreet, iron-fisted handling of high-net-worth divorces. He was the man you called when a marriage wasn't just ending, but being strategically dismantled. "Arthur, it's Ava Sterling," she said, her voice even betraying none of the chaos raging inside her. "I need to see you. Today." Meanwhile, Liam's attempts to reach her were relentless. He sent texts filled with frantic apologies and desperate pleas. He left long, rambling voicemails, his voice cracking with a theatrical sorrow that she no longer believed. He even had his mother call a woman who spoke of forgiveness and the sanctity of marriage, conveniently ignoring the public humiliation her son had wrought. Ava ignored them all. She put her phone on silent and let the digital storm rage outside the walls of her soundproofed prison. She packed, not a frantic emotional throwing of clothes into a suitcase, but a deliberate, curated selection. She packed for a different life, an unknown destination. She chose practical, comfortable pieces, cashmere sweaters, maternity jeans, soft linen shirts. She left behind the couture gowns and skyscraper heels that belonged to Mrs. Liam Sterling. She packed the ultrasound photos, the first tiny pair of shoes she had bought for the baby, and a worn copy of a novel from her college days. She was not just packing clothes. She was editing her life, stripping it down to the essentials. Liam, barred from their bedroom, grew more desperate. He tried to talk to her through the closed door. "Ava, please just talk to me. We can go away. Anywhere you want. The Maldives, our place in Aspen. We can turn off our phones and just be us again. Us." The word was a ghost. The us he spoke of was a fantasy built on a lie. She continued to fold a small baby blanket, her hands steady. Her meeting with Arthur Finch took place in a sterile, wood-paneled conference room overlooking Bryant Park. Arthur was a man in his late 60s, with eyes that had seen the collapse of 1,000 unions. He listened patiently as Ava, in a calm, flat tone, recounted the events, never once letting her voice break. She didn't speak of heartbreak. She spoke of betrayal as a breach of contract. "He violated the core tenets of our partnership," she stated, as if discussing a business deal. "His recklessness has not only destroyed our personal trust, but it has endangered the financial stability of our future and that of our child. Auratech stock has plummeted 32% in 2 days. His personal brand, which is inextricably linked to the company's, is toxic." Arthur nodded slowly, impressed by her clarity. "What do you want, Ava?" "I want out," she said without hesitation. "I want a clean break. I want the divorce papers drawn up immediately. I want our prenuptial agreement enforced to the letter, including the infidelity clause. And I want sole custody of my son." "Liam will fight this," Arthur warned. "He will paint you as hysterical, emotionally unstable due to the pregnancy. His team will use his wealth and power to drag this out, to bleed you dry." "Let them try," Ava said, a flicker of fire in her eyes. "Liam built his empire on the idea of impenetrable security. I was his partner in that. I know where the vulnerabilities are, not just in the business, but in him." She left Arthur's office with a new kind of strength. The decision was made. The path was clear. When she returned to the penthouse, she found Liam waiting in the living room, looking haggard. A half-empty bottle of Macallan 25 sat on the coffee table beside him. "You saw a lawyer," he stated. It wasn't a question. "My CFO got a call from Arthur Finch's office requesting access to my financial records." "You're really doing this?" "It's already done," Ava said, walking past him toward the foyer. He scrambled to his feet, blocking her path. "Ava, think about our son. What kind of life will this be for him? A broken home. Parents at war with each other in the tabloids. It was the ultimate manipulation, using their unborn child as a shield. The ice around Ava's heart cracked, and a pure, hot rage surged through her. "You did this to our son," she hissed, her voice finally breaking its calm facade. "You chose that woman, that sordid little affair, over him, over us. You stood in his nursery last week and talked about the legacy you would build for him. Was this it? A legacy of scandal and public disgrace? Don't you dare stand there and pretend you are doing this for him." He recoiled, stung by the venom in her voice. He saw it then. The woman he had married was gone, replaced by a stranger with eyes like steel. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice softening, pleading. "You have nowhere to go without me." It was meant to be a statement of fact. He controlled the money, the properties, the entire infrastructure of their life. He believed he had her trapped. Ava gave him a small, cold smile. "That's where you're wrong, Liam. I have everywhere to go." She walked to the large, ornate console table by the door. She placed her wedding and engagement rings on the polished surface. The 8-carat diamond, a symbol of their unbreakable bond, looked garish and hollow. Next to the rings, she placed a thick manila envelope. "These are for you," she said. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours. Goodbye, Liam." He stared at the envelope, his name written on it, in her elegant script. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside were the divorce papers. The top page cited irrevocable differences due to spousal infidelity. It was clinical, brutal, and final. When he looked up, she was gone. The private elevator was descending. He was alone in the silent, cavernous penthouse, with a glass of scotch, a set of divorce papers, and the ruins of his perfect life. He had assumed he could manage this crisis like any other business problem. He had fundamentally misunderstood the woman he married. He had severed their bond, and now she was severing him from her life completely and irrevocably. Ava stepped out of the elevator and into the pristine, anonymous lobby of her building, taking her first breath of free, albeit polluted, New York air. For a moment, she felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Liam was right about one thing: she had no immediate plan. Her family was in California, and flying there would mean facing a barrage of well-meaning but suffocating pity. Staying with friends in the city was impossible. The media circus was in full swing, with paparazzi camped outside their building like vultures. Every hotel would be a temporary and very public refuge. She was a ship cut from its moorings, adrift in a hostile sea. Her phone, which she had finally switched off, silent, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Usually she would ignore it, but something compelled her to look. "Ava, I know this is an unimaginable time. If you need anything, a place to think, a safe harbor, anything at all, just say the word. No questions asked. Damien Blackwood." The name hit her like a memory from another lifetime. Damien Blackwood. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade. They had been in the same program at Stanford. He was a prodigy in economics, she in art history and business. They were study partners, friends, part of a close-knit group that had spent late nights fueled by coffee and ambition. Damien was quiet, intense, and brilliant, with eyes that saw more than he let on. He had a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. There was an unspoken connection between them, a gentle chemistry that had never been acted upon. She had met Liam her senior year, and his dazzling charisma and bold vision had swept her off her feet. Damien had faded into the background, a ghost of a path not taken. She knew what he had become. While Liam built a public-facing tech empire, Damien had moved in the opposite direction, into the shadowy, powerful world of private equity. He was the founder of Blackwood Capital, a firm known for its aggressive, almost prescient investments and its founder's intense privacy. He was a billionaire, several times over a phantom figure rarely photographed, who moved between London, Hong Kong, and New York with quiet, absolute authority. How had he even known? Of course, she realized. The scandal was global news in the financial world. Damien would have seen the headlines, seen the catastrophic drop in Auratech's stock. But for him to reach out. Her fingers hovered over the screen. It felt like a lifeline thrown from a distant shore. Liam believed he had her trapped, that she was helpless without his resources. But Liam didn't know about Damien. He was a part of her past that Liam had never bothered to learn about. Taking a deep breath, she typed a simple reply. Damien, thank you. I might need that safe harbor sooner than you think. The reply was instantaneous. A car will be at the corner of 78th and Park in 10 minutes. A black Audi A8. The driver's name is Arthur. He will take you to Teterboro Airport. My jet is waiting. It was decisive, immediate, and overwhelming. Teterboro. A private jet. This was a level of power that rivaled and perhaps even surpassed Liam's. There was no hesitation, no request for details. It was a simple, clean solution. A way out. She slipped on a pair of oversized sunglasses, pulled up the hood of her coat, and walked out the service entrance of her building, bypassing the press corps at the front. The black Audi was waiting exactly where he said it would be. The driver, a stoic man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the door for her, without a word. The tinted windows provided a welcome shield from the prying eyes of the city. As the car pulled away from the curb, Ava felt the first true exhale she'd had in 2 days. She was leaving her old life behind, one city block at a time. At Teterboro, the private airport in New Jersey that served New York's elite, she was escorted directly onto the tarmac. A sleek Gulfstream G650 stood waiting its engines, humming softly. The flight attendant, a woman with a kind and discreet smile, welcomed her aboard. Welcome, Miss Sterling. Mr. Blackwood has instructed us to take you to Villa Elena on Lake Como. We have everything you might need for the flight. Please make yourself comfortable. Lake Como, Italy. It was so far, so removed from the toxic chaos of her life, it might as well have been another planet. The interior of the jet was a study in understated luxury cream leather seats, polished dark wood, soft cashmere blankets. It was opulent, yet felt personal and comforting. A stark contrast to Liam's jet, which was branded with the Auratech logo and felt like a flying boardroom. Once they were in the air, soaring above the clouds, Ava finally allowed the dam to break. The adrenaline that had sustained her for days receded, leaving behind a raw, cavernous grief. She curled up in the large seat, wrapped a blanket around herself, and wept. She wept for the husband she thought she knew, for the future that had been stolen, for the trust that could never be repaired. She cried for the innocent child in her womb, who would be born into a world fractured by his father's betrayal. The flight attendant quietly placed a cup of chamomile tea and a warm towel beside her, then retreated, giving her the privacy she needed. There was no judgment, only a gentle professional care that was profoundly comforting. Hours later, as they began their descent over the snow-capped Alps, Eva looked out the window. The first light of dawn was breaking, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. Below, the deep blue jewel of Lake Como emerged nestled among lush green mountains. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a scene of impossible serenity. Villa Elena was perched on a hillside in Bellagio, a magnificent old estate surrounded by terraced gardens of cypress and jasmine. It was not a sterile, modern palace like her penthouse, but a place with history and soul. Damien was waiting for her on the stone terrace overlooking the water. He looked different from the college student she remembered, yet fundamentally the same. He was taller, broader, with a quiet confidence that radiated from him like a low heat. His dark hair had a few distinguished threads of silver at the temples, and his eyes, a deep, thoughtful grey, held the same intelligence and kindness she recalled. He didn't rush to hug her or offer platitudes. He simply stood there, a calm, steady presence. "Eva," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "Welcome. I'm glad you came." "Damien," she said, her voice thick with exhaustion and emotion. I don't know what to say." "Thank you." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "The staff will take your bags. There's food inside if you're hungry, but I imagine you'd rather rest. I've had the main guest suite prepared for you. It's private and has its own terrace. No one will bother you." He was giving her space. He understood without her having to explain that what she needed most was not conversation or distraction, but sanctuary, a place to heal. As she looked out at the tranquil water, with the distant church bells of a small village echoing across the valley, a single fragile thought surfaced. Maybe, just maybe, she was going to be okay. She had escaped the cage. And in this beautiful, quiet corner of the world, with the ghost from her past standing guard, she could finally begin to figure out who Eva Sterling was meant to be now. The first week at Villa Elena passed in a haze of sleep and stillness. Eva's body, exhausted from the emotional trauma and the strain of pregnancy, finally surrendered. She slept for 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, waking only to eat the simple, delicious meals the villa's chef Sophia would leave for her on a tray outside her suite. She ate on her private terrace, overlooking the lake, watching the small ferries crisscross the water like water bugs. For the first time in years, her schedule was completely empty. There were no charity galas to attend, no business dinners to host, no public image to maintain. There was only the rhythmic lapping of the water against the shore and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Damien was a master of presence without intrusion. He never knocked on her door or pressed her to talk. He simply made his existence known through small, thoughtful gestures. A collection of classic novels appeared on her bedside table. A soft pashmina shawl was draped over her favorite armchair on the terrace when the evening air grew cool. He would leave a note with her breakfast tray. "The gardens are beautiful this time of morning. The wisteria is in bloom." It was an invitation, not a command. On the 5th day, she felt strong enough to accept. She found him in a centuries-old greenhouse, tending to a collection of rare orchids. He wore a simple linen shirt and trousers, his hands dusted with soil. He looked up and smiled, a genuine, unforced expression that made his serious face seem boyish. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm. "I'm glad to see you up and about. Thank you for this." Damien, she said, her voice still a little rusty. For everything. It's more than I could have asked for. It's the least I could do for an old friend, he replied, setting down his pruning shears. How are you feeling? It was a simple question, but she knew he was asking about more than just her physical health. Empty. She admitted the confession costing her a great deal. And terrified. And a little bit relieved. It's a confusing cocktail of emotions. That sounds perfectly rational to me, he said, his gaze direct and empathetic. You've been through a seismic event. The aftershocks are bound to be disorienting. They walked through the gardens together, their conversation meandering. They talked about their time at Stanford, reminiscing about a particularly difficult statistics professor and a memorable late-night pizza run. They didn't talk about Liam. They didn't talk about the scandal. Damien was giving her a gift more valuable than his private jet or his luxurious villa, the gift of a normal conversation, a space where she wasn't the wronged wife from the headlines, but just Ava. Back in New York, Liam was experiencing the opposite of stillness. His world was a vortex of chaos. His carefully constructed PR narrative that this was a private matter, a momentary lapse in judgment for which he was deeply sorry, was failing. The media smelling blood was digging deeper. Chloe Vance, after being unceremoniously fired and paid a paltry severance, had hired the formidable celebrity lawyer Gloria Allred and was hinting at a tell-all interview. She claimed her relationship with Liam was not a simple affair, but a pattern of workplace harassment and abuse of power. The story was shifting from one of infidelity to something much darker, threatening the very foundations of Auratech, a company built on trust and ethics. Liam's attempts to find Ava had become frantic. Her credit cards were inactive, her phone was off, her family and friends claimed to know nothing. He had hired a team of private investigators from a firm named CQR, but Ava had seemingly vanished into thin air. He was a man who controlled information for a living, and the fact that his own wife had become a ghost was driving him to the brink of madness. He began to spin a new narrative to the board and his inner circle that Ava was emotionally fragile, that the pregnancy and the shock had caused some kind of breakdown, and that she had run away in a state of confusion. He was the worried husband, desperately trying to find his unstable wife to ensure her safety and the safety of their child. It was a vile, manipulative strategy, but it was all he had left. In Como, Ava slowly began to reconnect with the world, but on her own terms. Damien had provided her with a new encrypted phone and a laptop. She began to read the news, not with the raw pain of a victim, but with the detached analysis of a strategist. She saw Liam's attempts to paint her as unstable and felt a cold fury. He wasn't just trying to save his company. He was trying to preemptively discredit her for the custody battle he knew was coming. One evening, as she and Damien shared a simple dinner of fresh pasta and local wine, a small glass of red approved by her doctor, she finally brought him up. "He's telling people I'm having a breakdown," she said, staring out at the twinkling lights of the villages across the lake. Damien paused his fork halfway to his mouth. "Are you surprised?" No, Ava admitted. It's a classic move from his playbook. Control the narrative, isolate the target, define them before they can define themselves. I helped him design similar strategies for corporate takeovers. The irony was bitter. "He underestimates you," Damien said simply. "Everyone does," Ava replied. "They see the society wife, the party planner, the supportive spouse. They don't see the woman who helped write the business plan for Auratech on a napkin in a coffee shop. They don't see the woman who sat in on every Series A funding pitch. I see her." Damien said, his grey eyes holding hers. I always did. That moment hung in the air between them, filled with the weight of years and unspoken truths. It wasn't a declaration of love, but something quieter and more profound, a statement of recognition. He saw her, the real her, not the glossy facade. In the days that followed, a subtle shift occurred. Their conversations deepened. He told her about building his company, the loneliness of his success, the feeling of living a life so insulated that genuine connection felt impossible. She in turn told him about the slow erosion of her marriage, how Liam's ambition had gradually eclipsed their partnership, leaving her more of a corporate accessory than a wife. She began to feel a sense of purpose returning. She spent hours on the phone with her lawyer, Arthur Finch, directing her legal strategy from afar. She was no longer just reacting. She was planning. She instructed Arthur to file a motion demanding a full forensic audit of Liam's personal and corporate finances, knowing that Liam's aggressive business practices often blurred the lines between the two. One afternoon, Damien found her by the pool, a laptop open, a determined look on her face. "You look like you're preparing for battle," he observed. "I am," she confirmed. Liam thinks he's cornered a frightened rabbit. He's about to find out he's cornered a wolf. The stillness of the lake had done its work. It had quieted the noise, soothed the pain, and allowed her to hear her own voice again. And that voice was no longer whispering in grief. It was speaking with the cold, clear language of war. While Ava was finding her strength in the tranquility of Lake Como, Liam Sterling's empire in New York was beginning to crumble with astonishing speed. The dominoes, carefully arranged over a decade of ruthless ambition, started to fall one by one. The first domino was Chloe Vance. Her threatened interview with Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes became a reality. On a Sunday evening watched by millions, she presented a portrait of Liam that was far from the one-time mistake his PR team had crafted. She came armed with saved text messages, voice notes, and even a secret recording. In a hushed, tearful voice, she described a corporate culture at Oratech where Liam was a king and his whims were law. She alleged that he had implicitly tied her career advancement to their affair, dangling promotions and bonuses in front of her. The affair was recast as a grotesque abuse of power. Whether true or a brilliantly executed revenge plot, it was devastating. The hashtag #TantoraOffAbuse began trending worldwide. The second domino was the board of directors at Oratech. Initially loyal, their patience was wearing thin. The stock, which had stabilized after the initial drop, now nosedived again, wiping out billions in market capitalization. Major institutional investors, like the massive CalPERS pension fund, issued public statements expressing grave concern over the leadership and governance at the company. The board facing shareholder lawsuits and a PR nightmare that was now morphing into a corporate governance crisis convened an emergency meeting. They weren't just discussing the scandal anymore. They were discussing the viability of Liam Sterling as CEO. Liam, who had always commanded rooms with his unshakable confidence, found himself on the defensive. He was arrogant and dismissive, treating the board's concerns as an overreaction. This is a personal matter, being exploited by a disgruntled ex-employee. He thundered over a conference call. It has nothing to do with the fundamental strength of this company or my ability to lead it. But the damage was done. His affair had revealed a fatal flaw in his character, a recklessness that they now feared might extend to his business practices. The man who sold security to the world was proving to be the company's single greatest liability. The third and most critical domino was the one Ava had pushed from thousands of miles away. Her lawyer, Arthur Finch, armed with the motion she had demanded, formally requested a complete forensic accounting of Liam's finances under the justification that his personal and corporate assets were so intertwined that a fair divorce settlement was impossible without it. This sent a shock wave of genuine panic through Liam's camp. It was one thing to fight a PR battle. It was another thing entirely to have a team of bulldog accountants from a firm like PricewaterhouseCoopers crawling through every wire transfer, every offshore account, and every shell corporation he had ever created. Liam had always played fast and loose with the rules. He funneled company money into personal investments, used corporate accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle, and engaged in aggressive and legally grey accounting practices to inflate Oratech's quarterly earnings reports. It was a house of cards, and Ava knew it. She knew because, in the early days, she had been the one to caution him against it. She had been the voice of prudence he had long ago stopped listening to. From her sun-drenched terrace in Como, Ava watched the news unfold with a grim sense of vindication. She felt no joy in Liam's destruction, only a profound sadness for the man he could have been and the company they had dreamed of building together. Her fight was no longer about revenge. It was about securing a future for her child, a future untainted by Liam's collapsing world. Her relationship with Damien continued to deepen in the quiet spaces between the chaos. He became her confidant, her sounding board. He would listen as she passed the latest news from New York, offering insights from his own world of high-stakes finance. "He's over-leveraged," Damien commented one evening, after reviewing a financial report Ava had been sent by her legal team. "He's used his own inflated Oratech stock as collateral for a series of massive personal loans. Loans he used to fund that ridiculous mega-yacht and the acquisition of 2 smaller tech firms. If the stock doesn't recover, the banks will call in those loans. He could be facing personal bankruptcy." "How did you know that?" Ava asked, impressed. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Damien's eyes. Blackwood Capital was exploring a potential acquisition of one of those smaller firms last year. We did our due diligence. We saw how Liam structured the deal and we walked away. It was too reckless. It was another piece of the puzzle. Damien wasn't just a passive observer. He was a player in the same arena as Liam, but he played by a different set of rules. He was disciplined, strategic, and patient, all the things Liam was not. Liam, feeling the walls close in, made a desperate last-ditch effort. He defied his lawyer's advice and called Ava's encrypted phone, somehow getting the number from a source he refused to name. Ava, seeing the unknown number, almost ignored it, but a strange instinct made her answer. "Ava." "Thank God. It's me." Liam's voice was frayed, stripped of its usual bravado. Ava said nothing. "Listen to me," he pleaded. "You have to call this off. These lawyers, these accountants, you're destroying the company. Our company. You're destroying me." "You did that yourself, Liam," she replied, her voice as calm and steady as the lake in front of her. "This is about him, isn't it?" He spat his desperation, twisting into jealous rage. "My investigators finally found you. Lake Como. At Damien Blackwood's villa. Of all people. You left me and ran straight into the arms of another billionaire. Oh, so. How does it feel to be such a cliché? Ava Damien is an old friend who offered me sanctuary when my husband publicly humiliated me and put our child's future at risk," she said coolly. "This isn't about him. This is about your choices. your lies. I will not let you do this, he roared. I will fight you with everything I have. You will not get a dime. You will not get my son. The line went dead. Ava stood there, the phone in her hand, her heart aching, not with fear, but with pity. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about money. He thought he could threaten her into submission. He had no idea that the dominoes were no longer in his control. They were falling, and they were about to bring the entire temple down on top of him. Liam Sterling, believing he was launching a counter-offensive, made the most catastrophic mistake of his life. He booked a flight to Milan, his mind consumed by a singular, desperate goal, a face-to-face confrontation with Ava. He was convinced that if he could just get in a room with her, he could use the force of his personality, their shared history, the memory of the love they once had, to make her see reason, his reason. He would beg, he would threaten, he would charm. He would do whatever it took to get her to call off the lawyers and the forensic accountants who were now crawling through the entrails of his financial life. He arrived at Villa Elena unannounced, bribing a local boatman to take him to the villa's private dock. He stormed up the stone steps from the water, his expensive suit wrinkled from the flight, his face a mask of haggard fury. He found Ava on the main terrace, reading in a comfortable-looking lounge chair, a glass of water at her side. She looked serene, healthy and more beautiful than he had seen her in years. The sight of her peace fueled his rage. Ava, he said, his voice tight. She looked up, and her eyes registered not shock or fear, but a weary resignation. It was as if she had been expecting him. Liam, you shouldn't be here. Shouldn't I? He shot back, striding toward her. This is my wife. This is my son you're carrying. I have every right to be here. At that moment, Damien Blackwood emerged from the villa. He moved with a quiet, imposing grace, placing himself slightly between Liam and Ava. He wasn't overtly threatening, but his presence was a clear and solid boundary. Sterling Damien said, his voice low and even. You're trespassing. I suggest you leave. Liam laughed a harsh, grating sound. Of course. The White Knight, Damien Blackwood. I should have known. Were you just waiting all these years for me to screw up? Tell me, did you call her the minute you saw the news, or did you wait a whole 5 minutes? What I did. Damien said, his eyes like chips of flint, was offer a friend a safe place to go when her husband's actions put her on the front page of every tabloid in the world. Now I'm asking you to leave. I'm not leaving until I speak to my wife. Liam insisted, his eyes fixed on Ava. Ava, please. End this madness. We can still save something from this wreckage. For our son. There is nothing left to save, Liam. Ava said, her voice filled with a final heart-breaking certainty. The only thing I care about now is protecting our son from the mess you've created. By hiding out in your ex-boyfriend's mansion, he sneered. You think a judge is going to look kindly on that? The pregnant wife who abandons her marriage and jets off to Italy with another man? It was then that Damien took a step forward. You should be very careful what you say, Sterling. You seem to be under the impression that your only problem is a messy divorce. Liam scoffed. Oh, I know all my problems. The board, the SEC looking into Chloe's allegations. I can handle them. I've handled worse. I don't think you have, Damien said. You see, you think this all started 3 weeks ago when those photos were published, but your problems started much, much earlier. Do you remember a small data analytics firm called Veritas Data Solutions? Liam's face went blank for a second, then a flicker of recognition and something else, something like fear, crossed his features. Vaguely. A failed startup. We acquired some of their assets in a bankruptcy sale 5 years ago. What about it? You didn't just acquire their assets, Liam. Damien said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. You destroyed them. Veritas had developed a proprietary encryption algorithm that was light years ahead of yours. They were a threat. So you hired away their lead engineer in violation of his non-compete clause, and then you used your connections at a key venture capital firm to pull their second round of funding at the last minute, effectively bankrupting them. Then you swept in and bought their intellectual property for pennies on the dollar. Liam's face had gone pale. That's business. Is it? Damien continued. What if I told you that my firm, Blackwood Capital, was the silent majority partner in that key venture capital firm? And what if I told you that the founder of Veritas Data, a brilliant man named David Chen, was one of my oldest and dearest friends, a friend who lost everything because of you? The air on the terrace grew thick and heavy. This wasn't just a confrontation between a husband, a wife, and a new man. This was something else entirely. A reckoning that had been years in the making. You're bluffing, Liam stammered, but the confidence had drained from his voice. Am I? Damien smiled, a cold, predatory expression that had surely terrified corporate boards around the globe. When Ava's lawyers initiated their forensic audit, it gave my people the legal subpoena power they needed. They aren't just looking for hidden marital assets anymore, Liam. They are looking at everything. They are cross-referencing your illegal acquisition of Veritas's IP with Oratech's SEC filings from that year. You claimed the development of your next-gen security key as an in-house R&D expense. That's securities fraud, Liam. You lied to your shareholders and to the federal government about the origin of your core technology. Ava stared at Damien, stunned. She had known Liam was ruthless, but she had never known the specifics of the Veritas deal. She had never known Damien's connection to it. The lifeline he had thrown her hadn't been random. It was the culmination of a long, patient game. This is insane, Liam whispered, looking back and forth between Ava and Damien. You planned this, both of you. You are a man who understands consequences, Liam, Ava said, finding her voice. These are the consequences, not just for cheating on me, but for everything, for the way you've conducted your business, for the people you've hurt. The infidelity was just the loose thread that allowed everything else to unravel. Liam looked utterly defeated. The fight was gone, replaced by the dawning horror of total annihilation. He wasn't just going to lose his company and his wife. He was facing federal charges. Prison time. The devil had finally come to collect, and he had been hiding in the details all along. You need to go, Liam. Ava said, her voice now soft with a strange mix of pity and finality. There is nothing more to say. He stared at her one last time, at the woman carrying his child, at the man who had so thoroughly and patiently orchestrated his ruin. Without another word, he turned and stumbled back down the steps toward the waiting boat, a man not just leaving a villa, but leaving his entire life behind. In the aftermath of the confrontation, a profound quiet settled over the villa. The violent storm of Liam's presence had passed, leaving behind the clean, crisp air of resolution. Ava stood on the terrace, one hand on her belly, watching the boat carrying her husband, her soon-to-be ex-husband, disappear across the water, until it was just a white speck against the vast blue canvas of the lake. She didn't feel triumph, nor did she feel the sharp sting of vengeful satisfaction. What she felt was a deep, bone-weary sense of closure. A chapter, a whole volume of her life had finally definitively ended. Damien came to stand beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a long time they said nothing, simply sharing the view. "I didn't know," Ava said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "About your friend, about Veritas." "I know," Damien replied. "It wasn't your battle to fight. My involvement was always about holding Liam accountable for his actions. When he hurt you, it became personal on a level I hadn't anticipated. It accelerated the timeline. You waited 5 years, she mused, turning to look at him. That's a very long game. A sad smile touched his lips. In my world, patience is the most powerful asset. David, my friend, he passed away 2 years ago. A heart attack. His doctors said it was stress-related. After that, it was no longer a game. It was a promise I had made to his memory. The revelation settled between them, clarifying everything. Damien's help wasn't an act of romantic opportunism. It was an act of loyalty and justice that had, by a twist of fate, intersected with her own life-altering crisis. This shared enemy, this common cause born from Liam's separate betrayals, had forged a bond between them deeper than shared history alone. The news from New York in the following weeks was swift and brutal. The SEC, armed with the information from the forensic audit, officially launched a formal investigation into Auratech for securities fraud. Liam Sterling was forced to resign as CEO. He was later indicted by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Faced with irrefutable evidence, he took a plea deal, 5 years in a minimum security federal prison, a lifetime ban from serving as an officer or director of a public company, and financial penalties that would strip him of the vast majority of his fortune. Auratech, its brand irrevocably tarnished, was broken up and sold for parts. The empire had crumbled to dust. The divorce was quiet and uncontested. Liam, stripped of his power and facing prison, signed everything Arthur Finch put in front of him. Ava received a settlement that was more than enough to ensure her and her son's financial security for the rest of their lives. She was granted sole, undisputed custody. It was a clean surgical cut. Ava chose to stay in Italy. The Villa Elena, once a temporary sanctuary, had begun to feel like home. She and Damien fell into a gentle, unhurried rhythm. They took long walks, explored the small villages dotting the lake, and shared quiet dinners. Their relationship grew organically, built not on a whirlwind romance, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared conversation, and profound emotional support. He was there for her late-night pregnancy cravings and her moments of anxiety about single motherhood. She, in turn, offered him a window into a life of normalcy and genuine companionship that his insulated world had long denied him. One crisp autumn morning, 2 months after Liam's final visit, Ava was sitting by the lake when she felt the first unmistakable pangs of labor. Damien, calm and steady as ever, drove her to a private clinic in nearby Switzerland. Hours later, she held her son in her arms. He was perfect, with a full head of dark hair and his mother's deep, thoughtful eyes. She named him Nicholas, a name with no connection to the Sterling dynasty, a name that was entirely his own. As she looked down at her son's sleeping face, the last vestiges of her old life melted away. The pain, the anger, the humiliation. It was all just a story now. the prologue to this new, more beautiful chapter. Damien entered the room quietly, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. He looked at Nicholas, and then at Ava, and his smile was filled with a light she had never seen before. "He's beautiful, Ava," he said softly. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, a tear of pure, unadulterated joy tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. It was a life she had chosen, forged in the fires of betrayal and rebuilt on a foundation of her own strength. The woman who had jetted off from New York was a refugee fleeing the wreckage of her life. The woman sitting in this quiet Swiss hospital room was a survivor, a mother, a woman finally, truly at peace. Outside, the sun was rising over the Alps, casting a golden glow on the tranquil surface of the lake, heralding a new day, a new life, a new beginning. Ava Sterling's story is a powerful testament to the fact that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become the catalysts for our greatest transformations. It's a story about finding an inner strength you never knew you possessed, and realizing that the end of one life is often the necessary beginning of a truer one. She walked away from a billion-dollar empire, not for another fortune, but for something far more valuable: her peace, her dignity, and the future of her child. Her journey from a penthouse prison to the serene shores of Lake Como reminds us that our true safe harbor is not a place or a person, but the strength we find within ourselves. What would you have done in Ava's position? Could you walk away from everything you've ever known to reclaim your soul? If this story of resilience and rebirth resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they too can rebuild from the ashes, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life dramas. Don't forget to ring that notification bell and let us know your thoughts on Ava's incredible journey in the comments below. A swirl of frost-laced wind hits Daniel's face the moment he steps out of his car, black coattails flapping against the flurry of snow. The Winter Ball has been the most anticipated event of the year, a glittering palace of music, rich wines, and elite company. But for Daniel, it's another stark reminder that he's walking in alone. He steels himself, determined not to let memories of the past taint his evening. Then across the ballroom's grand foyer, he catches sight of her Eleanor, his ex-wife. She isn't alone. She's holding the hands of 4 children who each carry the exact color and shape of his own eyes. The Winter Ball took place in the heart of Manhattan at the luxurious Plaza Hotel near Central Park. Crisp December air clung to Daniel White's every breath as he made his way past doormen who greeted him with polite nods. The swirling lights of the city reflected on the fresh snowfall, granting an almost fairy tale aura to the evening. Inside, the hotel's lobby dazzled with poinsettias, golden wreaths, and artful Christmas trees. The florid notes of a string quartet wafted through the corridor, luring him toward the grand ballroom. Daniel, 37 years old, had always been considered dashing. Tall, with a chiseled jaw and haunted green eyes, he moved with a confident grace that came less from ego and more from an innate sense of self. Yet tonight, an uninvited pang of loneliness gripped his heart. Attending the ball alone was never his plan. Just a year ago, he had imagined standing here with his wife Elena on his arm, both of them in elegantly tailored outfits, exchanging polite smiles with Manhattan's elite, forging connections for their philanthropic endeavors. But life had taken a brutal turn. He and Elena parted ways under painful circumstances that still felt raw. Despite the veneer of normalcy, he attempted to wear Tom Ford suit perfectly, knotted tie, polished demeanor. Daniel felt like an open wound in the midst of a glittering crowd. Every decoration, every swirl of laughter, every passing perfume reminded him of the life he had lost. He tried to distract himself by thinking of small talk about his work at Harrington and White Investments, about the latest Wall Street Journal headlines about the real estate deals the firm had lined up. He thought of the people he might meet tonight. Potential clients, old friends, distant acquaintances like Teresa Wilson from his days at Yale, and donors who might support his cherished cause, the foundation he'd created in honor of his late father to fund scholarships for underprivileged kids. The grand double doors to the ballroom stood open, revealing a dazzling space, sparkling chandeliers, marble floors, and swirling couples in formal attire. As Daniel stepped across the threshold, he felt both an unsettling excitement and a sense of dread. Somewhere in this crowd, there could be a face from the past. Elena's face, perhaps, but in the swirl of suits and gowns, he couldn't immediately see her. He exhaled slowly, reminding himself that this evening was meant to be a fresh start, or at least a test of his ability to move on. After all, Elena had carved her own path, seemingly uninterested in the shared dreams they'd once built. He clenched his fists in his pockets. This night is for me, he thought. I'm going to enjoy myself, come what may. Daniel's mind drifted back to the day he first met Eleanor. It was during a summer internship at a hedge fund in Boston, back when they were both wide-eyed graduate students. She was bold, brilliant, and carried an aura of mystery that captivated him. Elena's luscious dark hair framed her olive complexion, and her deep brown eyes flashed with ambition. She had come from a modest background in Montreux, Switzerland, and her accent, along with her fierce determination, made her stand out among the crowd of interns. Their attraction was instant, fueled by late-night strategy sessions and stolen glances at coffee breaks. By the end of the internship, they'd begun a relationship that seemed as bright and promising as their future careers. Within 2 years after they'd finished graduate school, he at Yale, she at Columbia, they married in a private ceremony officiated at a small chapel in upstate New York. His mother, Carol White, and her father, André de la Montagne, blessed the union with tears of joy. Yet as they built their careers, cracks began to form. Both were ambitious. Both wanted the best for themselves, and ironically, that drive which once unified them started to push them apart. Eleanor felt stifled by the conventional life Daniel seemed to desire, a suburban home, dinner parties, early nights. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled to keep up with Eleanor's relentless push for success and adventure. She took job opportunities in Hong Kong and Zurich, while Daniel remained in New York to care for his ailing father and to stabilize his fledgling investment firm, Harrington and White, which he co-founded with his best friend from college, James Harrington. Long, silent months apart replaced the passion they once shared. Emails and texts became the main medium of communication. The final blow came when his father passed away, and Elena didn't show up to the funeral. She was stuck in a negotiation in Shanghai, or so she claimed. Daniel never forgave her for that. The day after the funeral, he filed for divorce. The year since the divorce was granted felt like a haze of regrets and half-hearted attempts to move forward. Daniel's mother tried to console him. James Harrington tried to bury him in work, hoping he'd forget his heartbreak in corporate success. But the hurt ran deep. He wasn't just losing Elena. He was losing the idea of the family he had so desperately wanted to build, the stability he had vowed to create, a vow that was broken. Little did he know that this fateful night at the winter ball would unravel secrets that would cut deeper than he ever imagined. A month ago, Daniel had almost declined the invitation to the winter ball. The event, hosted annually by New York's philanthropic circle, was a magnet for the richest and most influential personalities. It was a chance to mingle, to raise money for various causes, and to flash power and status. Harrington and White had been a chief sponsor for the past 3 years. Daniel James Harrington had told him, "We can't skip it. Our firm's entire public relations campaign is anchored on us being present front and center. This is how we attract high-profile clients." Daniel, sitting behind his mahogany desk, stared at the invitation's gold-trimmed edges. The bold lettering read, "Winter Ball, an evening of giving and glamour." He sighed. "I just don't feel up to it, James." His partner, a tall man with sandy hair and an unrelenting optimism, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Look, I know you've been through a rough patch, but it's time to step out there again. If you don't, you'll never move on." Daniel had half a mind to crumple the invitation. Memories of attending this event with Eleanor the previous year, dressed in matching midnight blue ensembles, dancing under the chandelier, celebrating the expansion of their philanthropic network, still haunted him. Back then, the final stage of divorce was looming, even if they pretended all was well in front of the cameras. But James had a point. Daniel's philanthropic foundation needed exposure, and the firm needed him to show that he was still the confident leader they all relied on. Perhaps the winter ball could mark a turning point, a chance to re-enter society with his head held high. After all, what were the odds Elena would be there? She'd been traveling the world, seemingly unconcerned with the philanthropic circuit in New York. Reluctantly, he wrote out his acceptance, sealed the envelope, and sent it back. The next day, he forwarded his measurements to his tailor for a new suit, an outward sign that he intended to move forward, even if his heart still lagged behind. The clink of champagne glasses and the resonant echoes of string instruments filled the grand ballroom. Women in sweeping satin gowns floated on the arms of men in crisp tuxedos. A faint scent of pine from the holiday decorations mixed with the sweet aroma of desserts placed at the buffet table. Daniel tried to relax by the refreshment station, swirling a glass of sparkling water. He was never one for too much alcohol, especially not when he needed to keep his wits about him. Around him, clusters of socialites murmured gossip and speculation. Teresa Wilson, a college acquaintance now working for the New York Times, offered him a polite nod from across the room. He returned the gesture, but avoided prolonged eye contact, not in the mood for an in-depth conversation. His eyes scanned the dancing couples, the swirl of color and elegance. Usually he'd find it all mesmerizing. The soft glow of chandeliers overhead, the confident laugh of donors proud to share their wealth, the swirl of philanthropic ambition that actually did some good in the world. But tonight, an uneasy tension weighed on him. Something about the air felt thick, as though the energy in the room was brimming with revelations waiting to be spilled. He stepped away from the crowd, weaving through elegantly dressed men and women. A group of corporate bankers from Goldman Sachs tried to engage him in talk about the stock market's recent fluctuations. Another small cluster from a tech startup pitched their new app. He feigned interest, made a few polite remarks, but found himself inching toward the corner of the room where a sense of quiet serenity reigned, just as he took a seat at a small table beside a pillar draped in silver garlands. His gaze drifted over the dance floor and froze. The murmuring crowd seemed to blur. The music dulled, as if his senses had zeroed in on a single figure. There, standing at the top of the ballroom's ornate staircase, was Elena. She wore a wine-red gown that accentuated her lithe form, her dark hair cascading in loose waves over her shoulders. A hush seemed to envelop him, like a wind had swept through his chest. After all these months, it still felt unreal to see her in person. It wasn't just Elena's presence that paralyzed him. At her sides stood 4 small figures. Children. 2 girls and 2 boys, each no older than 5 or 6. And in the gleam of the chandelier's light, Daniel noticed the most striking detail. Each child's eyes were the same luminous green as his own. His mind reeled. This had to be some sort of trick of the light. It couldn't be. But as Elena stepped forward, guiding them gently down the staircase, the resemblance became even clearer. 4 children with the same color and shape of eyes as Daniel White. A jolt of disbelief electrified his veins. He'd never heard Elena mention children after they split. He hadn't heard a whisper from mutual acquaintances. And now, out of nowhere, these 4 kids appeared, each bearing his most distinctive feature. The glass in his hand trembled. The lively chatter of the ball receded to a low hum. All he could do was watch, transfixed, as Elena and those children moved further into the throng of people, heading unerringly in his direction. Daniel rose slowly, heart pounding. If Elena saw him, she gave no outward sign. She turned to exchange pleasantries with a member of the philanthropic committee, her polite smile carefully in place. The children clung to her hands, one of the little girls glancing shyly around the room. Up close, the resemblance was even more impossible to deny. Each child had inherited the green eyes that were so distinctive in Daniel's family. Each had some subtle aspect of his facial structure, a dimple on the cheek, the angular tilt of the jaw, the gentle curve of the nose. He approached his steps, halting uncertain how to break the barrier of polite society that kept them separated. A swirl of dancers momentarily blocked his path. By the time he emerged into an opening, Eleanor was there, mere feet away, her expression unreadable. "Hello, Daniel," she said quietly. Even amidst the swirl of music and conversation, her voice carried to him, as though they were the only 2 people in the room. Her accent seemed a touch more pronounced than usual, or perhaps he was just hyper-aware of every detail in this moment. He swallowed, noticing the children shift uncomfortably behind her. "Elena," he managed, forcing out the word. Another breath. "I didn't know you'd be here." Her eyes flickered. The invitation came through an old contact. And, well, I wanted to support the cause. Also, I thought it might be time. "Time," he repeated. He let the word linger, casting a glance at the children, who were now standing awkwardly, clearly unsure of what was happening between the grown-ups. Time for what? She hesitated, and her gaze fell to the floor. Then, drawing in a soft breath, she said, "Time for you to meet someone." Turning, she placed a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "Mon chéri," she whispered to the boy on her right. "This is Daniel. He's an old friend of mine." Daniel's heart twisted. Just an old friend. The boy looked up, wide-eyed, and offered a polite greeting. The rest followed suit, each voice small but distinct. 2 girls, 2 boys, all in a line. His mind whirled. He couldn't form the words to ask the burning question, the question that screamed for an answer. Instead, he forced a cordial smile. "How do you do?" "We're fine," replied the eldest boy, whose hair was chestnut, just like Daniel's was as a child. "My name's Sebastian." The others introduced themselves, Madeline, Florence, and Thomas. The mention of their names hammered in the reality of their existence. Daniel extended his hand tentatively, and each child shook it with a curious, polite manner that seemed unusual for their ages. At last he turned to Elena with an expression that must have pleaded for some kind of explanation. She read it clearly. "Daniel," she said in a low tone, "I didn't plan on bringing them here to shock you. But I thought maybe this was the right time to tell you the truth." A tumult of anger, confusion, and heartbreak welled up in him. He glanced around, mindful of the many guests who might be watching. "Perhaps we should talk somewhere private." She nodded. "Yes, let's go to the side lounge. The children can stay with my nanny for a moment." She turned and beckoned a woman standing discreetly by the door, who hurried over and led the children away. A dull roar filled Daniel's ears as he and Elena glided along the perimeter of the ballroom. Guests parted to let them pass, and in their curious eyes, Daniel caught glimmers of speculation. Once they reached the smaller adjacent lounge, an ornate room with plush armchairs and soft lighting, they stepped inside and shut the door. The silence in the lounge was suffocating. Elena stood by a fireplace, golden light flickering against her dress. Daniel remained near the door, as though unsure whether to enter fully or bolt. Finally, she motioned him closer. His voice, when it emerged, trembled with barely contained emotion. Are they mine?" Elena studied him, eyes glistening. "Yes," she said, softly. "They are your children." The words struck Daniel like a physical blow. He staggered backward, pressing a hand against the door for support. For a moment it felt as though the world had inverted. The walls closed in his breath, caught in his chest. He tried to reconcile the reality of what he'd just heard with the life he'd been living alone, believing fatherhood was a dream that died when his marriage ended. How? Why? He struggled for coherent words. A dozen questions fought for priority in his mind. Why wouldn't you tell me? Why 4 children? Elena. Tears welled in her eyes, and she clasped her hands together, the diamond bracelet on her wrist glinting in the firelight. It's complicated, Daniel. I was pregnant when the divorce became final. I discovered I was carrying twins at first. But there was more to it. It was a complicated pregnancy that I had to keep under the care of a specialized clinic in Geneva. She paused, swallowing hard. I couldn't bring myself to tell you. We were both so angry, so hurt. And after the funeral of your father, I felt like there was no place for me in your life. No place for my burdens. Burdens, he snapped, voice rising. They're children, Eleanor. Our children. You denied me the chance to be a father. She flinched. I know. I was selfish. I was scared. My father convinced me it might be better this way. He wanted me back in Switzerland, away from the complexities of our relationship. A pounding ache built behind Daniel's eyes, half fury, half heartbreak. He remembered Elena's father, André de la Montagne, proud, aristocratic, always disapproving of Daniel's American roots. But 4 of them. Elena, how old are they? She let out a trembling sigh. Sebastian and Madeline are 6. Florence and Thomas are 5. Yes, I was already pregnant once before the divorce process, and it was a complicated timeline. I found out I was expecting Florence and Thomas much later. The pregnancies were nearly back-to-back. I kept it hidden under the chaos of traveling, and I found ways to manage without letting you know. Daniel closed his eyes. Waves of disbelief washing over him. For all this time, you never once sent me a clue. Never told me you'd had them. Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. I wanted to multiple times, But each time I gathered the courage, something stopped me. Your mother's health issues, the business expansions, and your anger. We left things so bitterly. I thought I could protect the children by keeping them away from a toxic environment. She shook her head. I see now. That was a mistake. Mistake. He barked a humorless laugh. It's so much more than that. Elena, you've robbed me of 6 years of fatherhood. I could have known them, raised them. She lowered her head. I'll never be able to make that up to you or to them, but I can try to fix it now if you'll let me. Daniel sank into an armchair, his limbs numb. This revelation turned his world inside out. For so long he'd thought fatherhood was an unreachable horizon, especially after the divorce. Now he had children, 4 living, breathing children who bore his eyes, his features, his lineage. He wanted to hate Eleanor, to rage at her for this injustice. But a quiet voice in his heart reminded him of how he'd once loved her, how complicated their parting had been. You should have told me, he whispered, pressing his palms to his eyes. I would have been there, no matter what was going on between us. That's a choice you made for both of us, and it wasn't yours to make alone. Elena knelt before him, voice quivering. I know. I'm sorry, Daniel. Please let's talk about how to move forward for the children's sake, if nothing else. He looked at her, seeing the raw fear and regret. In the space of a single evening, everything had changed, and he had no idea how to proceed in a way that would heal 6 years of damage. Overcome by the shock of Eleanor's confession, Daniel found his mind spiraling back in time. He remembered the bitter arguments that had led to their divorce, how his father's terminal illness put pressure on him to stay in New York, how Eliana, with her unstoppable career drive, had accepted an offer in Shanghai, simultaneously bristling at Daniel's pleas for her to return. He recalled the day he discovered the plane tickets she'd booked not just for business, but for a possible permanent move overseas. The day he confronted her, they both said things they could never take back. You'll never be satisfied with who I am, he'd accused. You don't want a partner, you want a trophy wife. She retorted, eyes blazing. They parted ways, each convinced the other was irredeemable. And in the swirl of attorneys and court proceedings, each attempted to carve out a future free from the other's disappointment. When the divorce finalized, Daniel had felt strangely numb, as if a piece of him had died. He sought solace in building Harrington and White into a powerhouse, throwing himself into philanthropic work, perhaps to fill the void left by the breakdown of his personal life. Now discovering Elena had been pregnant at the time, or just shortly thereafter, turned all his assumptions into lies. He remembered every phone call they missed, every email they'd let go unanswered. They had been so consumed by pride that neither had paused to consider the bigger picture, that there might be unborn children deserving of unity and love. In the quiet lounge, Elena was still kneeling by his chair, eyes rimmed with tears. The faint sound of the Winter Ball's orchestra drifted in from beyond the door, an incongruous soundtrack to their shattering revelation. He said softly, I need to know everything, Elena. No more secrets? She nodded, standing and moving to the window where she looked out over the city lights. I found out I was pregnant with Sebastian and Madeline about 4 months before we filed for divorce. But we were in the midst of the biggest fight of our lives. I was traveling for work. I felt alone, and my father persuaded me to stay quiet until I could come home to Switzerland. He never liked you, Daniel, and he wanted me to raise the children by myself. She turned to him, voice trembling. But then I realized I was expecting again Florence and Thomas shortly after the birth of the twins. The pregnancies were a medical miracle and complication. The doctors told me the second was an unusual overlapping pregnancy, extremely rare. I was terrified. I didn't know if I'd survive. There were complications. I was hospitalized for months in Geneva. During that time, my father kept everything hidden from the outside world. I was too weak to fight him. Daniel listened, each word burning into his soul. He envisioned Elena alone in a Swiss clinic battling a perilous pregnancy, while he, thousands of miles away, cursed her name for not being present in his life. A complicated swirl of sorrow, pity, and anger gripped him. And after the births, you just never thought it important enough to pick up the phone. Her eyes flashed with regret. I was scared. I was told you'd moved on, that you resented me. And in truth, I was ashamed for deceiving you. Yes, I let pride and fear dictate my actions. I thought maybe if I raised them alone, I could avoid all that heartbreak, all that anger. But it's been a burden on my conscience, especially as the children have grown and started asking questions about their father. Daniel closed his eyes, taking a moment to let her words settle. He pictured 4 children in a Swiss estate, asking, "Where's Daddy?" and receiving no real answers. The heartbreak coiled tighter in his chest. With trembling conviction, he rose to his feet. I have to meet them properly. They need to know who I am. Elena moved to open the door. Of course. They're just next door with the nanny. Let's go. Stepping into the side corridor, Daniel felt the warm overhead lights shining down on him with an almost glaring intensity. The sweet, festive music in the background felt surreal. He was about to meet his children for the first time in the midst of a glittering winter ball. In a small antechamber, the 4 children sat in a circle with their nanny, a petite woman named Dominique, who was reading them a story to keep them occupied. As soon as Elena and Daniel entered, the children looked up, their wide green eyes fixed on Daniel. Madeline, the older girl, peered at him with curiosity. "You look like me," she said quietly, as if discovering something extraordinary. Daniel knelt, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "I guess we do look alike," he replied. Sebastian, the older boy, placed his hands on his hips with a surprising note of confidence. "Maman says you're very important in New York. Are you a prince or something?" Daniel couldn't help a small smile. "No, I'm not a prince. I just help run a company. And I do some work helping others." Florence, a shy girl, nestled closer to her nanny. "Are you a good man?" she asked, her voice small. The question speared Daniel's heart. He glanced at Elena, who was silently watching, tears shimmering on her lashes. Carefully he answered, "I try to be. I'm not always perfect, but I do my best." Thomas, the youngest, touched Daniel's tie. "I like your tie," he said, smiling. Elena knelt beside Daniel, resting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Kids, I want you to know that Daniel is someone very important to me, and to you." She paused, her gaze flickering to Daniel. "He's your father." The words settled over the room. There was no thunderous reaction, no immediate meltdown, but rather a kind of hushed awe. Madeline was the first to speak again. "That means you love us." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "More than I can say. Even though we're just meeting, I already feel that you're the most precious gift I could have." Sebastian studied Daniel with a pensive look. "Then why didn't you come see us before?" A flash of guilt twisted inside Daniel, though the fault wasn't truly his. But how could he explain that? He glanced at Elena, who placed a gentle hand on Sebastian's shoulder. "That's my fault," she said. "I didn't tell him where we were. Sometimes adults make mistakes. Her admission left the children quiet. They seemed to accept it with a resilience that only children possess. Slowly, Thomas reached up and touched Daniel's hair, as if to confirm he was real. Daniel felt his heart break and mend all at once. He opened his arms hesitantly, offering an embrace. One by one, the children stepped forward. Madeline first, then Sebastian, then the others. Their small arms wrapped around him, and for a moment he closed his eyes, letting the warmth of their presence wash over him. He didn't notice the tall figure standing in the corridor until someone cleared his throat. Daniel looked up to see James Harrington, his business partner and longtime friend, wearing an expression of utter shock. Daniel James said, struggling for composure, I've been looking for you, but I see you're preoccupied." His eyes roved over the 4 children. "Are these?" Daniel nodded, still holding on to the children. "Yes." "Mine." James stood there, mouth slightly open. But he rallied quickly, offering a small, congratulatory nod. "I see. Well, I'll leave you to your reunion." He turned to go, then paused, giving Daniel a pointed look that seemed to say, "We need to talk." Daniel knew with a sinking feeling that his entire life, personal and professional, had just undergone a seismic shift. Everything from finances to living arrangements to his carefully curated public image would change once it became public knowledge that he had 4 children he'd never mentioned. And in his mind, he couldn't help wondering if more secrets were lurking behind Elena's sudden reappearance. Later that evening, after ensuring the children were settled in a quiet corner, with Dominique, Danielle, and Elena slipped away to find more privacy. They went up a short flight of stairs, ending up on a balcony overlooking the ballroom floor. Below them, the party continued in full swing, glittering gowns, twinkling lights, the hum of polite conversation. He stared down at the swirling crowd, then turned to Elena. "This is a lot to take in, Elena. Are you certain no uncertainties about their paternity?" She flinched at the question. "They're yours, Daniel. I swear it on everything I hold dear." His face softened. "I want to believe you. But you have to understand my perspective. You hid them from me for 6 years. Her cheeks turned pink. "I understand. If you want a paternity test, I won't stop you. Anything to give you peace of mind." He nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for doubting her. "I'm sorry. It's just, this is so unexpected." She waved off the apology with a trembling hand. "I deserve your suspicion, but I have no reason to lie now. My father, he urged me to cut you out of our lives entirely. He was never going to let you know about them. But they kept asking. They wanted to know why they didn't have a daddy like other children. And as they grew older, their resemblance to you grew more obvious." A wave of anger coursed through Daniel. "Your father, he's the one who convinced you to hide them from me." She shook her head. "I let him. I was emotionally weak, recovering from the pregnancies far from home. I can't blame him entirely." The mention of André de la Montagne sparked an old resentment in Daniel. Elena's father had never hidden his contempt for Daniel's lack of noble pedigree and the American approach to business. But to manipulate a situation this profoundly was beyond cruel. "You realize this is going to change everything," Daniel said. "I need to speak to a lawyer, figure out custody financial arrangements. And the children, how do we help them adjust?" Elena's face showed weariness, but also relief that Daniel was taking responsibility instead of pushing them away. "I've already spoken to a lawyer about my return to the States. I'm prepared to stay in New York if that's what it takes. He eyed her wary. And your job? She sighed. I stepped back from my international projects. Right now, I'm focusing on philanthropic work. My father doesn't approve, but that doesn't matter anymore. My priority is the children. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He recalled how they once dreamed of having children, raising them in a home full of love and mutual respect. That dream had crumbled. Now faced with reality, they had to figure out how to pick up the pieces and build something stable for 4 innocent lives. How do we start? He asked softly. Elena's lips curved into a sad smile. Perhaps by letting them know we both love them, that we are both here for them. Everything else can come later. For tonight, let's just be there for them. As the evening wore on, Daniel felt guilt creeping in. The 4 children, his children, were clearly bewildered by this sudden introduction. While they bravely tried to interact with Daniel, he sensed their uncertainty. After all, in their young minds, he was a stranger who happened to share their eyes, face shape, and last name. He tried to be jovial with them, kneeling to their level, listening to their half-formed stories about Switzerland, about their school, about the snow-capped mountains they missed. But inside, he was consumed by a swirl of emotions. He'd missed their first steps, first words, birthdays, 6 years of precious moments. And then came another jolt. During a lull, Madeline quietly asked, "Is Hans coming too?" Daniel glanced at Elena. Confusion etched on his face. Elena's expression stiffened. "We'll talk about that later, sweetheart," she said hastily. Hands Daniel pressed. Elena hesitated, then cleared her throat. I've been seeing someone, a colleague from work. It's not serious, but the children know him. He was around as a friend. A sharp pang of jealousy, anger, and betrayal shot through Daniel. That was only natural. Eleanor was no longer his wife, and she had every right to date. But the thought that another man had been a figure in his children's lives, even if just tangentially, set his teeth on edge. He fought to keep his voice calm. "So he's been around the children," Elena nodded, looking away. "They like him, Daniel. He's been kind to them." Daniel swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. "I see," Sebastian piped up. "Hans takes us sledding. He helped me make a birdhouse once. The image of another man, stepping into fatherly roles, stung Daniel deeply. Yet he forced a polite nod. "That's nice of him." Elena quickly changed the subject, offering the children a plate of mini pastries from a passing waiter. But Daniel's thoughts lingered on Hans. He wondered if Hans had become a paternal figure, if the children would look to him instead of Daniel. By the time the ball was winding down, Daniel had endured the well-meaning small talk of acquaintances who admired the adorable children, asking whose they were. He offered vague smiles and quick answers, uncertain how to handle such personal inquiries. Outside, the snowfall had intensified, blanketing the city in white. Daniel stood with the children under the glowing street lamps, waiting as a valet brought around 2 cars. He felt an unspoken tension with Elena by his side. They were 2 estranged individuals, forced back together by the existence of these 4 precious lives. "Where are you staying tonight?" he asked her. "At the Ritz, for now," she replied. "I didn't know how you'd react, so I didn't make longer-term arrangements." He nodded. "That's fine. Look, tomorrow I'd like to spend more time with them. Can we arrange that?" Elena studied him, relief softening her features. "Of course. They need to know their father." Daniel forced a tiny smile at the word father, still grappling with the weight of it. Then, as the children climbed into the waiting SUV, Daniel laid a gentle hand on Elena's arm. "Thank you for telling me, even if it's late." She gave him a somber nod. "And I'm sorry." In the hush of the swirling snow, Daniel watched as the vehicle pulled away. He stood there a long time, staring into the winter night, silently vowing that whatever happened next, he wouldn't abandon those children. No matter how painful the transition, they were his, and he was theirs. The following morning, Daniel woke in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Sleep had eluded him for much of the night visions of 4 bright-eyed faces populating his restless dreams. He rose early, brewing a pot of strong coffee as he mulled over the next step. He called his mother Carol White, who lived in a quiet suburb in Connecticut. It was time she heard the news. When he told her she had 4 grandchildren, the coffee mug almost slipped from his hand as he heard her reaction. First she stammered in disbelief, then sobbed, then erupted in joy mingled with confusion and a tinge of anger at Eleanor's secrecy. Despite everything, Carol couldn't wait to meet them. Daniel also placed a call to James Harrington, who demanded an explanation. They arranged to meet in the Harrington and White boardroom that afternoon, once Daniel had a chance to visit with his newly discovered family. A text beeped on Daniel's phone just as he stepped into the hallway. "Elena, we're at the Central Park Zoo with the kids. Meet us here if you can." Daniel hurried to dress, donning a casual sweater and coat. The crisp winter air bit at his cheeks as he strode down the block, weaving past holiday shoppers and carriage horses. The sense of surreal anticipation made his heart pound. At the zoo's entrance, he found Elena and the children watching seals swim in a large tank. The children spotted him first, waving excitedly. His chest warmed at their enthusiasm. He approached with a smile. "Hey guys," Sebastian grabbed his hand. "Look at the seals, Papa." The casual use of Papa startled Daniel, but he squeezed the boy's hand in response, a lump forming in his throat. Elena noticed his reaction. "They adapt quickly," she murmured, eyes bright with unshed tears. They strolled along, admiring the polar bears and penguins, occasionally stopping to buy hot cocoa. Daniel tried to soak in every detail, how Madeline tugged on his sleeve to show him her favorite animals. How Thomas giggled when the penguins waddled, how Florence shyly stuck close to Elena, how Sebastian asked a million questions about everything. They were a family moving in a loose cluster, forging a tender sense of unity. Yet Daniel couldn't help noticing a shadow in Elena's gaze, as if she were keeping another secret. After a while, Sebastian raced ahead. "Papa, there's an ice sculpture over there." Elena and Daniel lagged behind, exchanging a look. "They're incredible," Daniel remarked. "Smart, curious. I'm amazed at how they each have their own personality." Elena smiled. "You would have made a wonderful father, Daniel." He regarded her intently. "Is there anything else you haven't told me? Because right now I need the truth. Everything." She sighed, glancing away. "There is something else, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. It's about Thomas. He's had some health issues since he was born prematurely." Alarm raced through Daniel. "Health issues? Is he okay?" "He's mostly fine," Elena said quickly. "But he has a minor heart condition. The doctors say it's manageable with medication and monitoring. He might need surgery in the future, but there's a good chance he won't." Daniel's face paled. "My God, Elena, you should have told me. I'd have been there for him." She placed a hand on his arm. "I know. This is what I regret most. I'm ready to set things right now. I've brought them here so we can live in New York for a while, see specialists if needed, and ensure he gets the best care. I'll bear any cost if you want." Daniel's response was immediate. "No. We'll share it. He's my son, our son. I'll do whatever it takes to help him." Emotions swarmed in Eleanor's eyes, relief mingled with sorrow. "Thank you." Their conversation was cut short by the children's excited calls. They hurried over, trying to smile and laugh as if everything was normal. But for Daniel, each moment with the children was a reminder of what he'd missed and of the challenges to come. After the zoo, they decided to warm up at a nearby cafe, a cozy establishment known for its artisan pastries. The children devoured mini croissants while Elena sipped a cappuccino, and Daniel hovered protectively, noticing every detail about his new family members. Between bites of pastry, Florence hesitantly asked Papa, "Do you have a nice house?" Daniel chuckled softly. "I have an apartment. It's big enough for all of you if you ever want to visit." Madeline's face lit up. "Can we see it?" Eleanor shot Daniel a questioning glance. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" He took a moment before nodding. "Yes. I'd like them to see where I live. I have a spare room that can be turned into something for them." So it was decided. They gathered their things and took a quick taxi ride to Daniel's penthouse overlooking Central Park. The building's doorman, Mr. Bartholomew, nearly dropped his cap upon seeing Daniel leading 4 children by the hand. "Elena. Kids?" "This is home," Daniel said, opening his front door. The foyer was sleek and modern, perhaps too sterile for children's tastes. Sebastian's eyes widened at the floor-to-ceiling windows, while Madeline squealed with delight at the view of the snowy treetops and distant skyscrapers. They spread out, exploring. Elena followed them, pointing out paintings and artifacts Daniel had collected. Her gaze stopped on a photo of Daniel's parents. "Your mother will be ecstatic," she said. "She's already invited all of you to spend Christmas in Connecticut," Daniel replied. A flicker of fear touched Elena's face. "It might be overwhelming to meet your entire family so soon." He shrugged gently. "They're the children's family too, Elena. We can take it slow. I just want them to feel welcomed." She nodded, watching Thomas run giggling across the living room's polished floor. They deserve a big family Christmas. They've never really had that. A warm feeling grew in Daniel's chest. Maybe despite the heartbreak, they could form a family dynamic, if not as husband and wife, then at least as coring co-parents. Suddenly, Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. She excused herself, stepping into the hallway. Daniel lingered, an uneasy feeling creeping over him. A few minutes later, Elena returned, face ashen. "What's wrong?" he asked. "It's Hans," she said, voice tight. "He's in New York. He wants to see me and the children." Daniel felt a sudden wave of protectiveness, almost territorial. "He has no claim on them. I'm their father." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not that simple. The kids know him. They care for him." "But I'm here now," Daniel insisted, trying to quell the anger. "I won't just stand by while some stranger plays father." She looked torn. "I understand. I'll talk to him. Just please don't make this more complicated than it has to be." Daniel exhaled, controlling his temper. "Fine. But I want to be present for any meeting. The children need stability, not confusion." Elena nodded, and the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease. But the mere prospect of Hans stepping into the picture threatened to upend the fragile dynamic Daniel and Elena were beginning to forge. Over the next few days, Daniel spent every spare moment with his children. He took them to the Museum of Natural History, where they marveled at dinosaur skeletons and celestial exhibits. He showed them Rockefeller Center's towering Christmas tree, letting them watch the ice skaters gliding beneath twinkling lights. Those days were some of the happiest Daniel had experienced in a long time, yet a lingering worry about Hans hovered in the back of his mind. Would Hans try to disrupt his reconnection with the children? One afternoon, while Elena and the children were napping in their suite at the Ritz, Daniel went to his office to meet James Harrington. Sitting in the sleek boardroom with glass walls overlooking Manhattan, Daniel braced for James's barrage of questions, so James began leaning forward. 4 kids. Daniel, you have no idea the shockwaves this is causing among our investors and clients. They're all calling me asking if there's some scandal or if we've been hiding something. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. I didn't know, James. Believe me, this was as much a surprise to me as it was to the world. James studied him intently. Do you believe Elena's story? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. She's done a DNA test already. Or at least she's offered it. I believe her. They have my eyes, for God's sake. James exhaled. All right, so how are we handling this from a PR standpoint? Daniel thought for a moment. We release a brief statement saying I've recently become aware of my children that I intend to fulfill all my responsibilities as a father, and that the details remain private. That should suffice. I don't want to exploit my kids' private lives. James agreed. But be aware the media might spin it. Elena was high profile in the finance world too. They'll probably dig up old dirt. Daniel nodded, crossing his arms. Let them dig. I just care about the kids right now. They're my top priority. James softened, offering Daniel a supportive smile. You've always wanted a family, man. Maybe this is your chance. Just be careful with Elena. She's unpredictable. Daniel gave a mirthless chuckle. Trust me, I know. After the meeting, Daniel returned to the Ritz, a sense of determination fueling him. He wanted to talk to Elena about officially moving back to the US with the children. But when he arrived, he found her in tears in the lounge. She looked up, eyes puffy. Hans. He confronted me. He demanded to see the children. He's threatening legal action, claiming he's acted as a de facto parent. Daniel's blood ran cold. He has no legal claim. He's not their father. Elena sniffed, wiping her cheeks. He's not listed on any birth certificates, of course, but he's threatening to tell the tabloids about everything about how I hid the children from you, about the details of our finances. He wants money, Daniel. Daniel ground his teeth. So he's blackmailing you. She nodded miserably. I broke things off with him as soon as I decided to come to New York. He didn't take it well. Now he's furious. Rage coursed through Daniel, but he forced himself to remain calm. We'll handle it. I'll talk to my lawyers, and we'll put a stop to his threats. The children won't be used as pawns. Eleanor looked at him with gratitude. I'm sorry, Daniel. It seems every time you try to fix things, I bring another complication. He gently took her hand. We'll get through it. Together. For the kids. That evening, an unexpected phone call shattered the fragile calm. Hans called Daniel directly. His tone was aggressive, laced with bitterness. You think you can just waltz back into Elena's life and claim those children, Hans spat. I've been the one helping them for years. Daniel clenched his jaw. They're my children, Hans. My blood. Hans laughed harshly. Your blood, sure. But I was there when Eleanor needed help. If you had any decency, you'd let me at least see them. Daniel paused, wrestling with the primal urge to tell Hans to stay away forever. But he also recognized that the children knew Hans. Forcing them to lose him abruptly might be traumatic. "We can discuss a supervised meeting," Daniel conceded. "But if you try anything, any attempt at blackmail, I'll see you in court." Hans scoffed. "You think your money and power can scare me?" Elena's father tried that. He didn't succeed. Daniel ended the call, fury boiling in his veins. Elena, who stood nearby, watched him with anxious eyes. "We'll do a supervised meeting," he told her. "It might help the children's transition if they can say goodbye or set boundaries. But he's not going to threaten us anymore." She nodded, tears of relief shining. "Thank you for handling this." They set the meeting for the next day in the presence of lawyers at a neutral law office. The children arrived with Elena subdued and confused. Hans was already there, face pinched with anger. When the children ran to greet him, Daniel's stomach twisted. Hans cast a smug glance Daniel's way, as if to say, "See, they're mine in spirit." But Sebastian, after hugging Hans briefly, hurried to Daniel's side. "Papa, are you okay?" Daniel's heart soared at the simple question the child's concern for him. "I'm fine, buddy," he murmured, tousling Sebastian's hair. The negotiations that followed were tense. Hans wanted continued contact, threatening to leak scandalous information. Elena confessed that Hans had personal emails and financial records that could be damaging if taken out of context. Daniel's lawyer threatened Hans with a defamation suit if he went public. Finally, they reached a precarious agreement. Hans would receive a severance of sorts, a lump sum from Elena's personal funds, and would agree to no future contact with the children unless they requested it themselves once they were of age. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it would stave off immediate scandal and harassment. The children seemed unsettled as Hans gave them a final hug. Thomas clung to him for a moment, tears glistening in his eyes. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight, but he tried to remain stoic. Hans left abruptly, slamming the door behind him. Outside the office, Elena knelt to comfort the children, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel joined them, feeling the weight of these events pressing down on their small shoulders. In that moment, he promised himself he would never let them feel abandoned again. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Elena and the children moved into a rented townhouse near Daniel's apartment. Daniel spent his weekends showing them American traditions, like decorating a Christmas tree, baking cookies, and practicing English holiday carols. The day finally came for the children to meet Carol White, their grandmother in Connecticut. Despite the tension and swirling emotions, the meeting was a joyous occasion. Carol wept openly as she embraced each of her grandchildren, scolding Elena only briefly for keeping them hidden for so long. Christmas morning found them all gathered in Carol's cozy living room. Snow fell softly outside. The children squealed over presents, and Elena found herself welcomed warmly, surprisingly so, by Carol's motherly grace. Daniel, dressed in a comfy sweater, took time to reflect on how drastically his life had changed in mere weeks. He now had the family he had once dreamed about, though not in the way he'd imagined. Elena and Daniel still had much to resolve. Their romantic relationship remained uncertain. Old wounds and betrayals lingered, but so did a lingering thread of love. They'd begun counseling, determined to co-parent effectively. Whether or not they would reconcile as a couple remained to be seen. One late night after the children had gone to bed, Daniel and Elena sat on his penthouse balcony. The city lights twinkled below the hush of snow, making the moment feel magical. Elena leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. "Do you think we could ever be a family again?" she asked. Daniel slipped an arm around her, 1,000 thoughts flooding his mind. "I think we already are a family," he said softly. "Maybe not the conventional kind, but we'll figure it out." Elena gazed at him, a small smile curving her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving us another chance." He closed his eyes, inhaling the crisp winter air. "Thank you for letting me be a father." They sat there for a long while, listening to the distant hum of the city, their hearts brimming with the complicated, fragile hope of a new beginning. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of heartbreak, hidden children, and the fragile hope of new beginnings. Daniel's story reminds us that even through betrayal and pain, love and forgiveness can lead to unexpected miracles. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world. See you in the next story.